Well, I'm happy to say that it's warming up in Canada, which means that it's almost time to start my summer TBR. And so I wanted to share with you what I have planned to read over the summer months. Now I'm sharing 20 backlist titles, so this does not include new releases that I've received from publishers or pick up on my own, but instead talking about some of the books that I've been meaning to get to for way too long. And I like to do this seasonally because my reading mood changes a little bit with the temperature. And so during the summer, it gets very, very hot outside, or at least hot for Canada. And so because of that, I tend to lean towards lighter books. I definitely typically fall into a bit of a reading slump around August, so I'm preparing for that. So I'm purposely picking books that are a little bit breezier as opposed to some of the really heavy epic fantasy and science fiction and horror books that I might pick up in the middle of winter when it's cold and blizzarding outside. So if that sounds good, if you're interested in what I'm going to read, let's get started. First, let's talk about the books I'm going to read with my Patreon book club. I try not to mention it too much, but I do have a link down below if you ever want to support me there. We get to read a book together, and honestly, we just hang out online. We talk about food and pets and all those fun things, and just a better way to kind of chat with me outside the comments. Anyway, in the month of June, it is a horror month. The theme that the patrons chose was nautical or maritime horror, and so the book that was selected is one I'm excited about because I'm kind of getting more into historical horror, and that is The Deep by Alma Katsu, which is a horror retelling of the events of the Titanic, a historical event that is haunting and terrifying in its own right. I've mentioned that I have a huge fear of drowning at sea. When I first watched the Titanic movie as a child or young teenager, I believe I was, I remember throwing up because I was so horrified by the scenes of people falling off the boat and drowning. So I'm hoping this one will be very effective for me, given that visceral reaction I tend to get when I picture or imagine people drowning in any kind of story or real life event. So I'm excited to read that one with the book club. It should make for some good conversations. Then in July, it is my birthday month, and so I always do a book club takeover. So rather than my patrons getting to pick the theme and nominate books for the shortlist that we vote on, instead I get to choose the shortlist. And every year I love to reread books in general, so every year I choose some of my favorites that I just feel like revisiting again. And this year I included all the different genres, and not surprisingly, my horror-loving book club picked Goddess of Filth by V. Castro, and this of course is a horror novella that is a possession story centered around the Catholic Church, and there is a priest at the center of the story, and it's just a book that was made for me, a book I adored when it came out. I think I give it 5 stars. And also, as it is a shorter book, just a novella length, I think it will have more participation in the book club since it's not such a big commitment when everyone else is otherwise really busy. I'm really looking forward to discussing that one as well. Now I'll keep you posted what we read in August. That hasn't been selected yet, but as well, we also have an opportunity for top tier patrons to nominate a book for my personal TBR. So they all nominate a book, and then you just run it through a random number generator. And the book that won this time is Rules of Prey by John Sanford. I've read his science fiction Saturn Run and really love that book, but I've never read his proper thriller. I believe this whole series involves serial killers or very dark action type books that involve a lot of gruesome content and things like that. Kind of that classic action thriller that is really popular. This series is crazy long running, and I would love to hear if you've read it or have thoughts on it, what you think down below. But I'm looking forward to reading it. It's again a book that I'm interested in. I've thought about reading many times, but I love that this patron option gives me that little nudge to pick up something that I was probably going to read at some point, but it might have been 10 years in the future, so I'm glad I'm getting to it sooner because of this. Next, let's talk about dark fiction, which is kind of a general term for all the thrillers, horror, and other dark and creepy things that I read. And so in this section, I am definitely leaning heavily into the thrillers. The first book I want to read is Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter. I honestly know very little of the plot, but she's just a beloved thriller author who I've read a few things by before. Some of them I've liked more than others. And so because they're so prolific, because she's written so many books, I do want to go ahead and keep going through her backlist. And so this is the one that was most recommended to me by my friend. And so if you have other feelings where I should go, I've already read Coptown, Pretty Girls, and then False Witness. So those are 3 books I've read by her, so I'm going to try this one next, but if you have a different opinion, perhaps you can sway me down below. I also want to read The Shining Girls by Lauren Bucas, and this I believe got turned into a TV show, but I might be wrong about that. It is a thriller involving a serial killer, but also has a speculative element. I believe there's time travel involved in it. It's one that's been on my radar forever, one I've wanted to check out forever. It has lower ratings on Goodreads, which perhaps has stalled it getting on past TBRs. But if I'm honest, if I look at a lot of my favorites, I tend to like unpopular things, so I really shouldn't let other people's opinions scare me away from checking out a book I've been dying to read for quite a while. So again, another book I'd love to hear more opinions on because it seems to be really controversial. Some people love it and some people apparently really don't. Then I want to read Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And this perhaps is a bit more contemporary than proper thriller, but this is a story that I understand involves an improper relationship between an adult and a younger person, and it was recommended to me so many times because of my love of Lolita and then My Dark Vanessa. And so this is continuing on that dark messed up rabbit hole, which I completely respect. Not everyone wants to go down, and I also respect and appreciate those that don't judge me too harshly for being fascinated by this topic. I think when it's dealt with right, I think there can be some good conversations around it, and I've heard that this book has some great representation that's just, again, much like My Dark Vanessa, is supposed to be quite nuanced and thoughtful in how it is done, and doesn't in any way glorify or victim blame or things like that. So I'm looking forward to that one quite a bit. It's one I've been dying to read. It's probably one of my most anticipated releases, but I held off because I thought it would be perfect for the summer months, and hopefully I'm not disappointed. Then I want to read The Lock by Steve Alton, which is a horror book involving the Loch Ness Monster. I read Meg last year as part of my summer TBR for 2023. Really enjoyed that book, and so I immediately put this one on this TBR, knowing I want to revisit them. I think, well, more so with Meg, it's clearly a summer book, but Loch Ness Monster, maybe it's more of a fall type of monster. I don't know, but I'm putting it on this TBR because I had a great time reading the previous book. And while this book is labeled as a thriller, I'm hoping the author will once again lean into some scientific theory, because I find that the stories are so much scarier and more interesting if they feel like they're grounded in reality, even if they're really, really not. And finally, for dark fiction, I want to read American Elsewhere by Robert Jackson Bennett. I've read several of his fantasy and science fiction books, and this one I understand leans a little bit more into the speculative side that dives lightly into horror. This is one that I know Stephanie from the Books in the Freezer podcast really enjoyed, and it's one that I've actually tried to read in the past, but something about the length has always scared me away that I started and I'm not ready to commit. This summer I want to change that. I've adored the author's other work, and so I want to read more of theirs, and again this year as well as last year I've really given myself the permission and promise to read the bigger books and not put them aside for later, Rachel's problem, but instead read them now. I am avidly reading a lot these days, and so it's a perfect time to read those really big buzzy books or just really chunky books that maybe don't get enough love online. And so I hope I love this one. I do worry it might be a little bit too atmospheric for me, but I definitely want to give it a try. Next, let's talk science fiction, starting with Red Rising, the series I would like to at least start it this summer. If you paid attention, it definitely was on a past TBR, and for whatever reason I just wasn't feeling it at the time, but I think a lot of you will be excited that I am revisiting this series and giving it a proper try. I know a lot of people have said recently that the first book is just not necessarily the strongest. It reads more like YA, more like the Hunger Games, and encouraged me to go and push on and really see what the series is all about. I'm also partially doing this because of the fact that I'm really enjoying doing more series reviews on my channel, and so if I feel like I have enough to say, I would like to do a whole series review for Red Rising. I think it's very big and buzzy, and I think it would be hopefully beneficial to some people who are like me trying to decide whether or not to pick it up, to get more opinions on what it's like, especially from someone who might not be a mega fan, but hopefully will end up enjoying it quite a bit. I just need to get into it and see what it's all about, so let me know if you want me to film that video once I'm all done. And along similar lines, there's another science fiction series I would like to review on my channel, and that's a series that starts with Ender's Game, which is the only book I've read at this point. I did a summary group review of that book in a different wrap-up over a year ago, and I would like to reread that book and then go on to the other books in the series. I believe the second one is Speaker for the Dead, and again, it's not like I'm the first person having that review online, but it does seem like when series are very popular that people enjoy getting different opinions, different perspectives, and different conversations on what works and what doesn't for people who, again, perhaps haven't started the series, or maybe you love the series and just enjoy hearing people talk about them. So again, if you're interested in that one, or if you think the internet's already oversaturated and tell me to skip that series review, let me know, but I'm definitely tempted to do it if I feel like I have enough to say, enough to add to the internet. Next is Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayden, which is the same author who wrote Escaping Exodus, a sci-fantasy space opera that I really enjoyed when it first came out, or when I first got a chance to read it. And so I wanted to go back and read more of this author's backlist, And while this book has some mixed reviews, it's again one I just want to try it for myself. I hope I'll love it. I don't know if I will, but I'm at least going to give it a try. I'm always looking for more underhyped science fiction out there, and this is one I don't hear discussed a lot online, at least in the circles I live. And I also want to read Bone Shaker by Sherry Priest, and this is a piece of steampunk, which again I know very little about. I am tempted to do the audiobook because I know it's narrated by Will Wheaton, one of my favorite narrators, and it's again one I need to check out. I haven't read a lot by this author, and I'd like to do a whole video on steampunk, but I definitely need to read more in order to accomplish that video, so this book at least will get me started in that direction. I also want to read Foreigner by C.J. Cherryh, which is the first book in a long-running science fiction series. I've really enjoyed some of C.J. Cherryh's other work, and this is arguably one of their most popular, and so one I've been meaning to read, because typically when I like a book by an author, what I try to do is, if possible, read more by that author afterwards, since it tends to be more of a reliable way to find more favorites. Since I already know I like one thing by the author, chances are I like something else. As I mentioned, the series is really long running, so I'm not going to commit to how many books I'm going to read over the summer. It just depends how much I enjoy it and how quickly I want to binge through the books. So again, if you have opinions on where the series goes, if it gets stronger, if I should keep reading to a certain point, love to hear those comments below. And I also want to read Timeline by Michael Crichton. This is an author that again is so prolific. They have so much backlist, and I'm slowly making my way through. This book, I understand, involves time travel. Again, another video I would love to do on my channel, but I really need to hit on some of the big buzzy books in order to at least mention them if I'm going to do a recommendation video on the topic. So this one I'm going into pretty blind, but I typically know with Michael Crichton you're going to get a fast page turner, hopefully with some good science behind it, depending on what you're gonna get. But with science fiction, time travel is always kind of hard. So I'm just looking for a fun ride, and I'll go in with those expectations. I also want to read Revenger by Alistair Reynolds, and this I know is a space opera story about space pirates, and that's pretty much all I need to know. I believe this one is more commonly classified as a young adult, which isn't normally an age group I read, but it's Alistair Reynolds, it's space pirates, and I kind of need to check it out for myself. I do recognize there are more epic books by this author that I should be reading, like Revelation Space, and I really do mean to get to that trilogy. But again, knowing my mood in summer, I think a lighter book will fit better, and I'll probably do Revelation Space as part of my winter TBR, because that's typically when I crave those really dense books, which I believe that trilogy is going to be. Finally, for sci-fi, I have An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is actually another young adult science fiction book. Again, if I am going to read YA, I typically read it during the summer when I want something a little bit more light and fluffy. I have never read this author before, but I've read their brother John Green, and actually really enjoy their books, which is somewhat of a controversial opinion. I feel like he's an author you either love or hate, and I lean on the side of loving his work. So I'm hoping I'll love his brother's work as well, and I've heard really good things about it, even from adult readers who, again, normally don't read a lot of the YA category, so that makes me hopeful that I'll enjoy it too. And finally, I got 3 fantasy books to mention here, a fantasy series in some cases. The first one is Magic for Liars by Sarah Gailey, and this is a book that is set in a magic school. I believe that there is some kind of mystery, possibly a murder that happens, and then they have to go and investigate. I am just a sucker when it comes to the magic school setting. It's one that I cannot get enough of, and again, I'm hoping this one will be a little bit lighter and fluffier than some of the other dark academia books that I have in my TBR, so I'm hoping this will fit the mood of the summer, and I would love to read more by this author. And I also want to read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is such a beloved classic online, or at least it was when it first came out. I believe it involves 2 rival magicians that are fighting for their place in the magical world and inside of their guilds. And so within the story, I believe it's supposed to be very haunting and atmospheric, and perhaps this one might be better for the fall. So maybe let me know if you think I should hold off and put it on the fall TBR. I'm just really interested suddenly in reading this book. I don't know why the mood is striking me now, so I might read it in the summer. If I don't, I'll read in the fall. I'd love your opinion down below if it's better to save for spooky season. And last, for fantasy, I want to read The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin, which I believe is a duology, so if I enjoy it, which I expect I will because N.K. Jemisin is one of my favorite fantasy writers, I do expect to finish out the Moonblood duology, I believe it is called, and this one is all set in a sandy environment and world inspired by Egypt and places like that, and so I just think that is going to be right for the hot summer months where hopefully if the characters are describing really hot, sticky situations, it'll feel very reminiscent to the experience I'm having. And it's one of the few N.K. Jemisin books I haven't read yet, so I'm slowly ticking them off the list because again, when I have a favorite author, I like to read everything that they have done before moving on to trying to find new authors if possible. Well, there you go. That is my summer TBR, at least in terms of backlist titles. Keep in mind, again, yes, I'm going to be reading all the new releases I can get my hands on in all the genre categories that I read. If you are interested, definitely hope you stick around and subscribe. If you want to hear more about this, don't forget to hit that little notification bell so you don't miss a video from me when I start sharing those reviews. And if you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a big thumbs up and you can share it around online wherever you live, X, Instagram, I don't know where the cool people are these days. And if that all sounds good, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.